Hello and thank you for joining us today. I'm Garima Batra, Content Marketing Specialist at cloudlims.com, and I'm excited to moderate this event. In the next 30 minutes, our speaker Montserrat Valdez will guide us through the LIMS data migration journey, offering invaluable insights and strategies for a successful transition. She will also share how a LIMS can serve as a powerful ally in streamlining processes and enhancing data integrity. Now, let me quickly introduce Montserrat. Montserrat is a senior scientist at cloudlims.com. She's a highly skilled chemical engineer with a diverse background in research and industry. In addition to her work as a chemist, Montserrat has also served as a research engineer, successfully coordinating various environmental projects of great importance. She has also made significant contributions to scientific literature through her research articles and conference presentations. Beyond work, she finds solace in activities that rejuvenate both mind and body. A fitness enthusiast, Montserrat dedicates time to working out, embodying the discipline and resilience she brings to her scientific pursuits. She also finds joy in nurturing her well being through meditation. An avid traveler, she explores the world, often accompanied by her beloved Maltipoo dog, who joins her on adventurous hikes. This adds a touch of nature to her routine. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few points so you know how to participate in today's webinar. All attendees will be in mute mode throughout this webinar. This is an interactive webinar, so we encourage you to ask questions anytime during the presentation by clicking the question mark icon at the top right-hand corner of your screen and entering your questions in the box below. The questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We will take as many questions as time permits, but we do want to end today's presentation on time. So if we are unable to answer your questions today, we will get back to you on email. Now let's welcome Montserrat.
Hi, Garima. Thanks for the introduction. Welcome to my presentation. Today, I'm talking about LIMS data migration. Let's explore together how this process ensures efficiency, integrity, and security in our lab operations. During this presentation, we are going to explore the following. What is LIMS data migration and its challenges, as well as the steps, approaches, and best practices for a successful LIMS data migration, and we are going to finalize with some case studies. The first question we need to answer is what is LIMS data migration? Data migration refers to the process of transferring data from one system or location to another. This could involve moving data from an old LIMS to a new one, upgrading to a newer version of LIMS, or consolidating data from multiple sources into a single LIMS. Why do we need this process of LIMS data migration? Well, we have seen several of our potential clients to approach us and to ask us for this data migration because of different reasons. Here we have some of the most common ones. The first one is because they are looking for a system upgrade or replacement. Labs might decide to upgrade their LIMS to a newer version because they want to get improved features, enhanced functionality, and better support for their evolving workflows. Labs might also be looking for a vendor change because of different factors such as a better customer support, cost considerations, or alignment with the specific laboratory requirements. Also, this change might be needed because of compliance requirements. Like as we know, these requirements and they keep evolving, so the LIMS has to have the capability of evolve with these requirements. Also because of business expansion, so we have seen mergers, acquisitions, or expansions. They might require the integration of data from multiple laboratories or facilities into a unified LIMS. Another reasons for this data migration, it might be the cloud adoptions, like labs might decide to go for a cloud system because they want a better flexibility and reduce infrastructure costs. They don't have to invest in expensive equipment or IT personnel. Also, a cloud-based LIMS facilitates remote access to their lab data. They might also be looking for this process because they want enhanced reporting and analytics, a better legacy system decommissioning, or security enhancements. Uh, there are several challenges in this LIMS data migration process. Here I'm going to mention some of them. The first one is the data loss risk. During the migration of data, we have to shut down our processes and of our analytical instruments, for example. So this might lead to the loss of information and data. So we have to be very careful in this process. The second challenge is the data format conversion complexity. Sometimes this data migration involves converting data from one format to another. So we might have problems such as compatibility issues or difficulties in retrieving or accessing data from the old system to transfer it to the new system. Another challenge is assure the quality of the system. This might be very expensive and a very long process, but we cannot compromise the quality of the data. Another challenge is the data security concerns. As we know, all this data will be in transit, so this might be make it vulnerable for unauthorized access, loss, or breaches. So we have to be very careful with all the security properties of the data while it's in transit from one system to the other. And finally, one of the biggest challenges is the cost implications. This data migration process might be very expensive because it might involve the purchase of new hardware or software, as well as hiring IT personnel. In this image, we can see the steps for a successful LIMS data migration. So as we can see, it all starts with planning, then we proceed to the data extraction, transformation, cleaning, validation, and as a last step, we have the data loaded into the new system. So let's take a look at each of these steps in more detail. So the first step is planning. The planning phase might consume a lot of time, but we have to do a very good planning to minimize the business downtime and avoiding laboratory data loss. Your laboratory should allocate all the necessary resources for this migration, and if you have a reputable LIMS vendor, they will help you with this process. They will assign a project manager to your lab, and they will guide you through the process, and they will address any questions, concerns, or issues that might come up during this transition process. While planning a data migration, we need to consider the following. The first one is the stakeholder alignment. So all the stakeholders need to have the same goals, including data owners, the functional team, or the lab management. The second aspect to consider is the legacy data evaluation. We need to ask ourselves if we need all the information in the old system in the new one, or if we can store some of this information in a warehouse, for example. And what compromises are acceptable. So we need to think about all these questions while we are evaluating this legacy data. Another thing to consider is the data suitability. We need to answer like the question, is all data suitable for migration? Or to what extent with manual data keying will be necessary? Another aspect to consider is the regulatory compliance. So we need to think if like the documentation is needed from a regulatory standpoint. So do security and compliance guidelines need to be followed to maintain accreditation? So we need to think about all these regulations in order to do a good data migrations process. We also need to consider the system maintenance strategy. So will both systems, like the new one and the old one, will be maintained simultaneously for a period of time, or this will be a complete transition, like just in a few weeks, we will migrate from one system to the another. We need to think about all of these things. And finally, we need to consider the migration timeline. So what is the proposed timeline for the migration? How can it can be performed with minimal disruption of the lab operations? So we need to consider all of this. The second step for a successful data migration is the data extraction. This refers to the process of retrieving data from the existing LIMS in preparation for its transfer to the new one, or a new version of the existing LIMS. We need to specify which data elements and records need to be migrated. This might include several sample information, test results, instrument data, user details. So we need to consider all the data that we need to transfer to the new system. Before this data migration, the source data needs to undergo a complete audit. So we need to see what kind of data we have. For example, if we have structured data that is very easy to transfer, such as tables and columns, or if we have any unstructured data, such as document and images that will be more challenging, is transition from the old to the new system. So here we have the interface of a LIMS. So it's important to have a LIMS that supports the export of large amounts of data in a simple and practical way. Here we can see the sample module. So we can just select all the samples that we want to export. And then we just need to click on the export records button. And just like that, we will be able to transfer a large amount of information and data to an Excel or CSV file, for example. The third step in this data migration process is the data transformation, also known as mapping. This is the process of matching attributes from the old system to the new one using a template. This the data mapping will be different depending on the complexity of the data types, and the difference between the old and the new LIMS systems. One example of this is like, for example, in your current LIMS, you might be having this field where the city and the state is just one field, like it's a combined field. And then if we look at the new system, it will have two different fields, one from the city and one from the state. So we need to do a very good mapping process to avoid difficulties in these kind of details. Here we have another image like of a LIMS system that offers an application attribute mapping with an Excel or CSV file. So as we can see, we can specify in which columns we have certain information, and we also can specify what type of characters is that. If maybe it's a alphanumeric, numeric, special character, etc. So all of these attributes can be matched in here. So the moment you transfer all your data from the old to the new system, it's very easy and with no errors. The next step is the data cleaning. So this involves identifying and eliminating any unreliable, inaccurate, duplicated, or outdated information from all the data sets, tables, etc. from your legacy LIMS. This helps prevent errors and inaccuracies from being transferred to your new LIMS. Some key aspects to consider while performing this data cleaning include error detection and correction. We need to identify and rectify errors in the dataset, such as misspellings, inaccuracies, or incomplete information. We also need to remove the duplicated data, and we need to standardize all these data. So we need to make sure that we have consistency and conformity in units, formats, structures that meet the specification of the new LIMS interface. We also need to make sure that we have complete data, so we need to perform a completeness verification, data integrity checks, and normalization processes. The next step is the data validation. This refers to the process of ensuring that the data transferred from the old system to the new one is accurate, consistent, and meets the specified requirements. Once the data migration is fully executed, we basically need to test, and test. So we need to make sure that everything is working as expected. Finally, the last step for this data migration is the data load. These steps involves populating the new databases, tables, and structures in the new LIMS with all the data that has been extracted, transformed, and validated during earlier steps. This is critical for a good functioning LIMS, the new one, and it also finalizes the transfer of information to the new system. By having a successful data loading, we can make sure that the information in our new LIMS it has accurate, reliable, and updated information. Here we can see another screenshot of a LIMS system in the documentation module. So it's important to have a LIMS that supports the import of amounts of data in a simple and practical way. For example, in this module, we can import several SOPs or test methods just by clicking in the import button, and we can add multiple documents in a very easy and user-friendly way. So once the data migration is completed, what's next? Well, the next step is the post-migration evaluation. This phase ensures that migrated data aligns with expectations, meets quality standards, and ensures effective operation of the new LIMS. This ensures the laboratory data integrity and addresses any issues during the transition. Some aspects to consider during this post-migration evaluation include data integrity check. We need to make sure that all the data that we transfer from the old to the new system is completed and accurate. The next step is to check the system functionality. So we need to evaluate the functionality of the new LIMS to ensure that it operates as expected. This includes some special feature, workflows, or any custom configuration that we perform during the transition. We also need to perform user acceptance testing, performance monitoring, and validation of customization. If there are any custom configuration or modification, we need to make sure that is improving the efficiency of the workflow and is not impacting negatively in the overall system performance. We also need to have our documentation review, security and compliance checks. So we need to verify that the security measures implemented during the migration process are effective in protecting the sensitive information. Also, we need to do a data retrieval testing, which means that the user can access the information that they need when they need it. So all of these need to have some testing. Also, we need to fix bugs and make the necessary adjustments. And finally, an user training assessment. So we need to assess the effectiveness of the user training to see if they need to get additional training, or if there are some areas where they need additional support, for example. So far, we have talked about how to migrate the data. However, we need to consider what will happen with both the old and the new systems and how we will transition from the old one to the new one. So for this, there are three different methods to consider. The first one is the parallel, the incremental, or the big bang. Let's see in detail each of these methods. So the first approach is the parallel. This refers to the simultaneous operation of both the existing and the newly systems for a period of time. This approach ensures consistency and accuracy in the new system. I have seen in many labs like this is the most common approach. However, we need to consider that it can be very resource intensive and it has a lot of technical complexity. You need to have all the personnel and all the capability in your analytical instruments to support two systems. So it might be very expensive. However, it improves the accuracy of the information, and in case you need to check something in the old system, is still available. So this is a very good approach, and it's the most common one that I have seen in the labs. The second approach is the incremental. In this method, data is migrated incrementally, often in stage in stages rather than all at once. This approach allows for a step-by-step migration process, reducing the risk of disruptions and enabling ongoing laboratory operation. An example of this kind of approach would be, for example, in the phase one, we do all the system configurations such as calculations, holding times, preparation steps for samples, or how to email reports and invoices. In the second phase, we can perform the instrument integration and see how we are going to verify the data. And then during the phase three, the last phase, we can go and proceed with the integration of third-party software, such as invoicing software, etc. So everything is in stages, so you can keep running your lab as usual while implementing the new system. Finally, we have the Big Bang approach. In this approach, a complete transfer of laboratory data and functionality from the existing to the new LIMS happens in a single and comprehensive operation. This transition occurs all at once and typically during a predefined period of time. This is the less used approach. Why? Because your IT systems need to be very simple. You cannot have a very complex IT system in order for this to work. Even though it has some advantages, such as it's very quickly, you can have a transition from the old to the new one in a matter of a month, for example, a week. But however, it has several unadvantages, such as a limited time frame that could affect customer services and difficulty, uh, like in case you need to access some information that was stored in the old system and then you don't have the old system anymore. So these might lead to new problems. So there are several practices recommended for a successful LIMS data migration. We have a comprehensive planning. So as I mentioned previously, we have to invest time and we need to allocate resources. We need to define the scope, the objectives, and the timelines of the whole process. We also need to engage stakeholders and the LIMS vendor support. So we need to involve all the key stakeholders such as laboratory staff, the IT teams, and management throughout the whole process. We need to have a good communication and collaboration between all these teams to have a better understanding of the process. It's recommended to do a data backup and have security measures in place. So before migration, take a complete backup of all data to prevent data loss. Also, you need to implement security measures to protect sensitive data while this data is in transit. Also, it's recommended to have some pilot testing, which means that you start transferring so just a subset of the data to see if it works properly or to identify any issues so we can solve all these problems before transferring the whole data set. We also need to consider the risk management. This means that we need to think about all the bad scenarios that can happen during this data migration process. And we also need to think how we would fix all of these issues if they happen. Finally, we need a feedback and continuous improvement process. So we need to gather information from and feedback from the users to identify areas that need to be improved. So we need to establish a process for continuous improvement to address the evolving needs of the labs. So by doing all this practice, we can enhance the likelihood of a successful LIMS data migration. Here we have some examples of why labs look for a LIMS data migration. The first one is a biotech company that wants to update the LIMS because they want to comply with new industry standards and regulation in this highly regulated biotechnology sector. So they need one LIMS that supports several modules that help them to achieve these accreditations. The second one is an environmental testing lab that they are migrating from a on-premise to a cloud-based LIMS because they want to have better scalability, a better accessibility, and reduce the cost involved with on-premise LIMS. They can save on software, hardware, and IT personnel. And finally, we have a case of a clinical laboratory that decides to switch vendors because they want to get a better customer support and they want a more tailored solution for their workflows. Now, let's talk about of the data migration support as a complementary services. So there are several LIMS vendors that they will charge extra for this data migration process, and there are some LIMS vendors that will offer it as a complementary services. So your LIMS of choice matters because like you can save a lot of money by having this as a complementary services. It will enhance your return of investment. It will improve the adoption process and it will ensure the data integrity during the transition process. So it's something to keep in mind that the vendor you choose offer this as a complementary services and they assign somebody on their teams to help you to address any issues or questions you have during this process. So as a conclusion, we can say that LIMS data migration is a complex process that laboratories undertake to enhance efficiency and to meet evolving industry standards. A successful LIMS data migration requires collaboration of all the stakeholders and commitment to data integrity. Also, choosing a LIMS vendor that provides data migration as a complementary service is crucial for improving the adoption process and keeping the data integrity. Thank you for attending this webinar, and now I'm open to questions.
Thank you for that insightful presentation, Montserrat. Montserrat, we've already received quite a few questions, so let us move straight on to these.
Okay.
Attendees, we are starting the Q&A session of the webinar, and the first question that we have from the audience is, if we already have a LIMS in place, what would be the expected timeline to migrate to the new system? Montserrat?
Thanks, Karima, for the question. This one is one that I get very often. So, well, this timeline depends on several factors that are very specific to each lab. For example, the complexity of their workflows, the extent of the data migration they need, also the resources they have allocated for this data migration. So all of these will vary depending on each situation of each lab. So I recommend consult with your LIMS vendor or your implementation specialist. They will tell you a more accurate timeline for your lab.
Thank you, Montserrat. Thank you for answering that question. Now let's move forward and address the second question that we have from our audience, which is, what strategies can be employed to minimize downtime during the migration?
Well, in my experience, I have seen like in order to decrease this downtime of the labs, you need to have a very good planning process. Also, you need to allocate all the resources necessary for this data migration process. And also, you need to pay attention to the operations of your lab. For example, if you know that summer is the busiest time for your lab, just plan your migration process during a period different of the summer. Also, you can do these activities during the weekends, for example. And then you can also consider for this data migration a parallel or incremental process instead of like switching just from one system to the other. So if you do it in stages, or running two systems at the same time, this will decrease considerably your downtime in your lab operations.
Great. Thank you, Montserrat, for your thoughts on the strategies for minimizing downtime during the migration. Moving on, the next question, Montserrat, is how do you address security and confidentiality concerns during data migration?
Actually, that's a very good question. We can use encrypted data transmission, also restrict the access of this data just to authorized users. Also, you have confidential data, you can mask all this data And also, it's important to train your employees on these security aspects of your data, and also maintain records of everything that you are transferring. All the information you need to get an audit trail and records of all of these activities.
Mm-hmm. Nice. That's a bunch of things that labs can do to mitigate the security and confidentiality concerns during data migration. I hope our audience is taking notes. Uh, Moving on, Montserrat, what post migration support is typically provided to users? I'm sure you get this question very often. The question is, what post migration support is typically provided to users?
Yeah, actually, this data migration process, it's a very extensive process from some labs. So after the process is completed, there are several aspects that we can support the users on. Like, for example, we can provide them with training sessions. They also can get tutorials, manuals. They can get access to frequently asked questions. And all of these issues or questions they might have, they will be somebody that can help them to address them. And also, they can also get some technical support. And it's important to maintain updated the new system. So regular updates to the new LIMS are also required.
Thank you, Montserrat, for your response. Audience, we have time for one or two more questions, so bring them on. I hope today's webinar has answered some important questions about LIMS data migration. Montserrat, let's see if we have any questions from the audience.
Okay.
But thank you for the comprehensive presentation, Montserrat.
I hope this
The
answers many of
comprehensive.
your questions.
It does, it does. All right, well, that was the last question for today, it seems. Attendees, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for asking all the interesting questions. Thank you, Montserrat, once again for the presentation and for answering all the questions from our audience. Attendees, as the webinar concludes, we request you to take a couple of minutes to fill out a short survey form that will appear on your screens. It will take just a couple of minutes, I promise. And if you have any questions about the topic of the webinar today, you can always write to us at support@cloudlims.com.
Okay. Thank you, Garima,
Thank
and
you.
thank you everybody who attended to this session.
Thank you and have a great day ahead.
Thank you. You too.